Beijing is cracking down on online deposit services offered by non-bank platforms. The move will impact $300 billion in savings. A mother and son are left homeless and forced to sleep outside in the winter. That's as more homes in one Beijing district are forcibly destroyed. Biden's pick for top Asia official reportedly worked for a certain nonprofit group. It's thought to be linked to a foreign influence campaign run by the Chinese Communist Party. A Chinese internet search giant has been approved by Californian authorities to test driverless vehicles on public roads. Meanwhile, the search engine is banned in India due to security concerns. More Indian troops are headed to the disputed border with China, while the U.S. commits to its defense partnership with India. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese Communist Party is cracking down on online deposit products offered by platforms like Jack Ma's Ant Group. Over $300 billion of savings from 100 million Chinese people will be affected. This is part of the regime's effort to tighten control over the financial sector. An analyst shares with us what exactly the Communist Party is worried about.
Many Chinese people are turning to their smartphones to help them save money. With the help of third-party financial platforms, they can buy saving products from small regional banks, often with much more generous returns than China's state-owned national banks provide. But now the Chinese regime says this has to stop. On Wednesday, nearly all major online financial platforms removed interest-bearing deposit services from their apps. It's set to affect over $300 billion in saving from 100 million Chinese people. Authorities are asking banks to take over the money. China affairs analyst Qin Peng says one reason behind the move is to protect the dominance of state-owned national banks. The financial platforms were mostly working with small regional banks. It allows them to attract savers from other parts of the country, where the banks don't have physical locations.
As a result, small regional banks, their amounts of assets and competitiveness may even exceed larger banks. It's put a lot of pressure on national banks. The national banks are basically all state-owned, and only they have the license to operate nationally. My understanding is that Chinese authorities are trying to protect the large banks so that the financial layout or the national banking system will remain intact.
According to Chinese regulators, some small banks came to be so reliant on these online platforms that late last year, finance regulators labeled the partnerships illegal. They also warned small and medium-sized regional banks against spreading outside their locales. Qian also pointed out another possible motive. Chinese authorities may be after data gathered by the financial platforms.
To get more information about bank customers, transaction information, and other key things. We've seen that authorities have ordered Ant Group to restructure. It will soon become a financial holding company overseen by China's central bank. In this way, the company's data, every single transaction, and all of its user information will be handed over to the Chinese regime.
The regime has vowed to intensify financial regulations in the future. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Now we turn to the World Health Organization or WHO experts in China. All eyes are on these experts right now as they're expected to investigate the origins of the CCP virus. The pandemic has swept the globe and caused over 400,000 deaths in the U.S. alone. The experts are on their second day of investigation after quarantining for 14 days. They have 2 weeks left to conduct the investigation, but a spokesperson says their movements would be restricted due to the Chinese regime's post-quarantine policy.
So the team will go out, but only where they will be bused to wherever, so they won't have any contact with the community. They will only have contact with those individuals that are being organized as part of the test, so as part of the study. So it will be very limited contact.
The spokeswoman says the experts would visit places suspected to be the origin of the virus, including the seafood market and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And they are visiting one of the first hospitals that treated virus cases during the start of the outbreak. In Wuhan, 8 doctors blew the whistle on the CCP virus, but they were silenced by authorities. Among them, one was infected with the virus and died. It's unclear if the WHO plans to meet with arrest. NTD reached out to the WHO for comment but didn't get a response before airtime. And the son of a virus victim is demanding to meet with the experts.
Only by listening to the experiences of victims' relatives can they better understand the timeline of the outbreak and find out the real source.
Zhang's father went to Wuhan for surgery on January 16th last year. It wasn't until 4 days later that local authorities admitted the virus is contagious. He contracted the virus while in hospital and died after 2 weeks. Zhang and other relatives of virus victims sued Wuhan authorities, but authorities dismissed the lawsuit. They also threatened Zhang and others who spoke to Western media. It's unclear if experts are allowed to meet with these victims' relatives. The CCP so far only says the team can speak with their fellow Chinese scientists. The regime also doesn't see the WHO trip as a probe. A foreign ministry spokesman on Friday says that, quote, it is part of a global research, not an investigation. The WHO's trip comes after much negotiation. Experts went to China last year, but were not allowed to go near the seafood market. And prior to this trip, the CCP tried to block them from going in, even after reaching an agreement with the WHO. Since November last year, a neighborhood of 3,000 families in Beijing has been forcibly demolished. Residents have to sleep outside in the severe winter and in the middle of a pandemic. NTD's Xiongbing has more.
One Beijing resident says authorities forcibly demolished his house earlier this month. The move left Li Qiang and his mother homeless in the middle of winter. Beijing authorities have been tearing down parts of the city's Changping district since November 2020, namely a neighborhood called the Jiuhua Agricultural Science Demonstration Park. Locals report seeing security guards wearing black clothes breaking into the area, which they say are sent by authorities. In efforts to force residents out of their homes, officials cut off the flow of water, electricity, and gas to the neighborhood. After living without utilities for 2 months, Li and his mother's house was demolished last week. With nowhere else to go, the mother and son slept outside the front of the local town hall, protesting what Li calls authorities' robbery. In other words, their decision to void their 20-year-old lease agreement. In China, aspiring homeowners must first get permission from authorities to lease land. So while they may own their home, the regime owns the land it's built on. These lease agreements only last for a certain amount of time. A video shot the day after the demolition explained why Li and his mother chose the town hall for their protest. The clip was reportedly shot by another neighborhood resident.
Why are they here? Because 20 years ago they signed a contract on the 5th floor of the Xiaotangshan Town Hall. The contract was a 50-year land lease, so they're fighting for justice after their house was demolished and stolen. They've been fighting in the neighborhood for 60 days after power and water were cut off. At one point in the house, the temperature inside the house dropped to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. The house was freezing, but they stayed there. The house was demolished yesterday. They don't have a place to stay. Now they found a place to take shelter in front of the town hall.
When security guards came to evict Li and his mother, they first broke into the house, then beat, scolded, and forced them out of the house. The building was then torn down.
This is my only house. They didn't show any legal documents to demolish my house. I just got up in the morning, saw 40 to 50 people coming during the severe pandemic situation. They detained us illegally by force, took us out of the house. The security guards surrounded us with shields and kept us from moving.
The neighborhood was built in 1998. Before the teardowns, it was home to about 300 households with more than 2,100 residents. Forced demolition is a common practice in China. Authorities often decide to take back the land in order to sell or develop it for more profitable projects. Residents usually receive little to no compensation. Reporting by Xiongbing, NTD News.
President Biden's pick for senior Asia policy official helped found a non-profit to promote Chinese language learning. But the group is later suspected to be heavily influenced by the CCP's propaganda agency.
Questions arise over President Joe Biden's incoming Asia policy czar, Kurt Campbell. He reportedly served as a top executive at a nonprofit suspected to be a front for Chinese Communist Party influence campaigns. That's according to an article by the Washington Free Beacon. The group is also called the U.S.-China Strong Foundation. Its entire website has since been taken down, but an archived website page lists Campbell as a vice chairman of the foundation. According to a Politico column he wrote in 2013, he launched the foundation as an independent nonprofit to help Americans to go to China and learn Chinese just weeks after Campbell left his position in the State Department under Obama. Part of the group's initial funding came from Chinese-American businesswoman Florence Fang. Fang is listed as the honorary president of the San Francisco chapter of the National Association for China's Peaceful Unification. The State Department says the group is part of the CCP's United Front Work Department, the Chinese regime's overseas propaganda agency. People working for the United Front often take advantage of economic and cultural exchanges to make connections with Western politicians, as well as academic and business leaders. The organization aims to influence the West-China policy. That's to make it more favorable toward the regime's strategic interests. Other leadership members of the U.S.-China Strong Foundation include Ronnie Chan. Chan is a U.S. citizen who served as an advisor for the Chinese regime State Council. He's also a former Hong Kong official and head of a registered foreign agent group of the Chinese regime. The foundation's funding sources include Chinese conglomerate Wanxiang. The Chinese company gained public traction in recent years for its hundreds of millions of dollars of 2012 investment in a small energy firm, which was a client of President Biden's son Hunter at the time. A 2019 Financial Times report highlighted the company in an article titled Hunter Biden's Web of Interests. The U.S.-China Strong Foundation has touted the Chinese regime and its projects. It appeared to celebrate the founding of the Chinese military in a 2017 Twitter post, urging followers to read about an address by Communist leader Xi Jinping. The group had also partnered with China's Confucius Institutes, an organization promoted as a language and cultural exchange between schools in China and overseas. The State Department labeled it as a foreign mission last summer, saying it promotes Beijing's propaganda and exports censorship to U.S. campuses. An expert told the Washington Free Beacon that the U.S.-China Strong Foundation could be very heavily influenced by the CCP, so much so that it may be virtually the same as a front group.
China is directing even more aggression towards Taiwan. Its defense ministry on Thursday warning that, quote, independence means war. The same day that Pentagon reaffirmed its long-standing support for Taiwan's self-defense. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby's remarks on China-Taiwan tension came as the first from President Joe Biden's military officials since he took office last week. But amid the show of U.S. support to Taiwan, the language in recent remarks has caught the island's attention, most notably a term used by a State Department spokesperson to describe Taiwan. Spokesman Ned Price said in a statement, the U.S. urges Beijing to engage in a meaningful dialogue with, quote, Taiwan's democratically elected representatives. He used the phrase in lieu of more authoritative ones, like Taiwan authorities or government officials. Those in Taiwan who take a hard stance towards mainland China expressed disappointment after the briefing. It marks a change from the language former President Donald Trump used to describe the democratic island. Above all, he referred to Tsai Ing-wen as the Taiwanese president several times, something that angered Beijing. The Chinese regime claims Taiwan as its own territory and part of mainland China. The island's official name is the Republic of China. It opposes Beijing's claim. Chinese internet search giant Baidu has been granted a permit by the Californian Department of Motor Vehicles used to test driverless vehicles. The company announced the news on Thursday. It allows Baidu to test autonomous vehicles without a safety driver on certain public roads within Sunnyvale and Santa Clara County. So far, 6 companies have been approved for similar permits. 4 of them are based in the U.S. 2 are headquartered in China, the other called AutoX. Nearly 60 companies have permits to test autonomous vehicles with safety drivers in the state. Last year, Baidu received permission to run similar tests in 2 Chinese cities, including Beijing. The Baidu search engine is one of almost 60 Chinese-made apps recently banned in India. The country's government cites concerns over data security and privacy risks. India's president says more troops are on their way to the disputed border with communist China, and the move is to protect India's sovereignty. This comes after India's foreign ministry says border clashes last year have put the relationship between the 2 countries under exceptional stress.
The events in eastern Ladakh last year have so profoundly disturbed the relationship because they not only signaled a disregard for commitments about minimizing troop levels, but also showed a willingness to breach peace and tranquility.
Relationship between India and communist China started plummeting following a clash on the disputed border last year. 20 Indian soldiers died. China also suffered casualties but didn't disclose the number. It was the first deadly clash in recent decades. The Indian Foreign Ministry says peace and tranquility in the border areas are the basis for developing relations. If they are disturbed, so will the rest of the relationship. And in the middle of tensions with Communist China, India's defense secretary received a phone call from his U.S. counterpart Lloyd Austin this Wednesday. Secretary Austin says the Pentagon is committed to the defense partnership with India. He also adds that the relationship is built on a common interest in making sure the Indo-Pacific region remains free and open. The UK is set to launch a new visa scheme on Sunday, allowing up to 3 million Hong Kong residents and their close family members to settle permanently in the UK. Beijing criticized the scheme, saying British travel documents are not valid forms of identification in China.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the UK is standing up for freedom and autonomy by offering a path to citizenship to Hong Kong residents. From Sunday, Hong Kongers with British National Overseas or BNO passports can apply to settle in the UK. It's in response to Beijing's harsh national security law imposed in Hong Kong. In what's seen as a largely symbolic move, Beijing now says it will no longer recognise BNO passports as a valid travel document. In an interview with the Epoch Times UK, Simon Cheng, a former British consulate worker who was tortured in China and the first BNO passport holder to be granted political asylum in the UK, says Beijing's comments won't have much effect.
It's just like a theatrical gesture, I would say. No any real meaning to most of the BNO citizens. Even I would say it would be relief because that is the mildest reaction of China they would do.
Also speaking to Epoch Times UK, BNO passport holder and Cantonese teacher Maggie Wong says there won't be a direct impact.
The most important identity document that allows you to come or go from Hong Kong is the ID card. So even though you can't use your BNO to leave Hong Kong or to arrive at Hong Kong, you can still use your Hong Kong passport.
The UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office says it's disappointed but not surprised by the Chinese decision to not recognise BNO passports. It added it looked forward to welcoming people from Hong Kong who wish to settle in the UK. While up to 3 million Hong Kong residents and their dependents can apply for the scheme, it's not clear exactly how many people will do so. Chief Executive of Hong Kong Watch, Benedict Rogers, believes Hong Kongers who do come will bring benefits to the UK in the long run.
I want Hong Kong to remain, to be the free city that it was until relatively recently. But given the situation in Hong Kong, I hope that those who want to leave can find that new life in the free world. But it's also a policy that in the long run will benefit Britain.
The government estimates about 150,000 to 300,000 may apply for the visa over the next year or two. Trevor Piper, NTD News.
Hong Kong's government is announcing new plans to crack down on prepaid cell phone use. The new rule would require people to register their identity when buying pay-as-you-go mobile phone SIM cards. Officials say the move is needed to help tackle a range of serious crimes, from phone scams to bombings. Under the proposal, people buying prepaid SIM cards would be required to register their name, Hong Kong ID card or passport number, and their date of birth. The plan prompted strong opposition from Hong Kong's pro-democracy forces. They say the move would increase the risk of government abuse of power and worsen lacking protection of public privacy. That's because in emergency situations, law enforcement can already bypass the courts to obtain information from telecom providers. At present, there are more than 20 million mobile phone cards in Hong Kong. More than half of them are anonymous. Amid pro-democracy movements in recent years, many protesters bought anonymous SIM cards to communicate with each other in attempts of being avoided or monitored or censored. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.